والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة نبيه والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على خير وكل ما نواه مشايخنا ابتغاء وجه الله وثوابه وقربه. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما نافعا يا كريم. Alhamdulillah, in our introduction to Arabic morphology class, we've been taking some of the introductory and fundamental opening discussions for the science in itself. And we just want to take this time to remind ourselves to renew our intentions, because it is according to the intentions that both the fruits of our efforts and the rewards of our efforts are found. A person who studies Arabic with sincere intentions for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will find facilitation in their learning, as has been seen by many of those who have come before us, some who had a lot of difficulty in learning Arabic. However, because of their sincerity and because of their consistency and persistence and striving, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opened the doors for them, and they became min afsahin nas, amongst those who are the most eloquent in Arabic language, even though they were not naturally Arabic-speaking people. Right? So the intention is extremely important in everything that we do. Right? And obviously, one of the core intentions of Arabic in itself is to access the Qur'an, the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? To access the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ in their original language. Right? Because so much is lost in translation of the beauty. Even though the words of guidance are still there, the instructions may transfer into another language, but the beauty is truly found in the Arabic. Tamam. Right, so I left what is here on the board from last class. I didn't erase it because I just wanted to use it as a quick review. Right, so last week we covered 3 considerations with regards to Arabic words, Arabic verbs specifically, and we added a 4th, right? So if I can stand up here, right? So we had that every verb is going to either be positive or negative, right? Positive being the default, right? That if you see a word and it doesn't have any of the particles that would make it negative, the negative prefixes, automatically it's positive. Okay, so the default is negative. All verbs are negative unless you make them, all verbs are positive unless you make them negative by adding a prefix. Okay, and the word for a positive verb is muthbit, okay, which means to affirm something. Manfi, which means to negate, is a verb that is prefaced by one of the particles of negation. And we talked a little bit about some of the particles of negation. There's different types of negation, right? That's the difference between saying that he did not do this and don't do this, right? They can be used in slightly differing ways. You have ma, and just as a recap, ma, which is generally used for past tense. It can be used for a present tense. La, which is usually used for present tense, can be used for past tense, usually only one. There's 2 verbs to be negated. So la saddaqa wa la salla, 2 past tense verbs. You can use la for both. Lan means never, only for present tense. And lam means didn't. And it's only used on a present tense verb. However, the translation becomes past tense. Right, so if I said, all right, for those who are listening, what does yaf'alu mean? Right, in the Qur'an it says, Allah yaf'alu ma yasha. Allah, right, yaf'alu whatever he wants. What is yaf'al? Yaf'alu. Is it positive or negative? I believe you have to unmute yourselves.
He is doing.
He is doing, good. Right, so positive, present. Right, so he is doing. If I add lem, right, I'm adding lem, right, to a mudari', a present tense verb, Right? It gives that verb a past tense meaning. Lam yaf'al, he didn't do. He didn't do. Right? So lam is very special. Right? So lam, it's used on a present tense, but once you use it, it's transferred. It transfers the meaning to a past tense meaning. Lam yaf'al and ma fa'ala are essentially the same thing. Ma fa'ala, he didn't do. Lam yaf'al, he didn't do. However, later on we'll see that there's situations where one is better than the other as far as eloquence. It makes more sense in keeping the synchronicity of the tenses together in the statements. Okay, so that's the first consideration, is positive or negative. Negative being when it's prefaced by one of the letters of negation, or the words of negation. The second is whether it's ma'ruf or majhul. So let's just switch real quick here. The second is whether it's ma'ruf or majhul, whether the doer is known. So that's the active, right? Yaf'alu, that's the default. If you switch it, if you switch the formation of the verb, it becomes passive, yuf'alu, which is it is done, right? So yaf'alu, he is doing, right? As we used here before we put the lam, right? He is doing, or he does. Right? If you switch it to yuf'alu, it means it is done, right? Right. So if I said, let's give another word. Let's test your vocabulary. What does yasriqu mean? Does anybody know what yasriqu means? Find the root letters, and then you may know what it means. Or if you have a dictionary and you're very quick with your fingers, you can check it. What does yasriqu mean?
It says he is stealing.
He is stealing. Good. Yasriqu, he is stealing. Okay. If I switched it to the passive, which is, and we mentioned before, how do you do that? You make the first letter a dhamma, and you make the second to last letter a fatha. Okay, yusraqu. Yusraqu, how would you translate that? Right, so now, right, the he part of he is stealing is no longer there, because that's active. That's when the doer is known. He is stealing. So the doer is known. Here we're talking about the doer is unknown. It's switched. It's inverted to a passive. Who can recall what the translation would be?
It was stolen.
It was stolen?
Oh, it is being stolen.
Yes, it is or will be stolen. Good, right? It is stolen, right? So, right, and this obviously has a lot of rhetorical advantages. For instance, if you want to say that your money was stolen, but you don't want to accuse anybody, you can say yusraqu maluhu, right? His money was stolen. Yusraqu maluhu, his money was stolen. You're not accusing anyone. Right? The doer is unknown, but the action is affirmed. So that was the second consideration. Right? And you can review what we did last week, how to form the passive in the present tense, the dhamma on the first letter, fatha on the second to last letter, and that applies to all the forms. In past tense, right, you're going to go from fa'ala. Right, so let's say sariqa is the past tense. Sariqa, right? You make the first letter a dhamma and the second last letter a kasra, and it always, right? And then right? If it's singular, it'll always end in fatha. Just like fa'ala and nasara and daraba, they always end in fatha when they're singular. So that was the second consideration. The third consideration was the tense. Okay, so we have, right, the maldi, which is past. And then you have the mudari', which is in some books translated as the imperfect. Or I believe it's imperfect or perfect? Imperfect, right? The imperfect tense. The reason why they call it imperfect is because it doesn't fit cleanly into one box. It can be, contextually you'll decide which one, but it can be present or future. Right? So just now we said yasriqu. Right? Yasriqu can be he is stealing, or he will steal in the future. Right? And just like there are certain certain words that you can put in front of yasriqu that will automatically make it one or the other. If I said len, right, and which we'll talk today about len yasriqa, it means he will never steal. Right? So it cancels out the possibility of it being a present tense meaning, because the word never, right, it doesn't mean he never steals. Right? He will never steal in the future. If I use lem, right, it makes it past tense. If I use, for instance, there's other prefixes that you can do, prefixes. You can put a seen. Sayasriqu, he will steal in the future. And we see this in the Qur'an a lot, right? There's two letters. One is seen and one is sofa, like the thing you sit on the couch. Sofa, right? And even though that was intended as a joke, there is a huge correlation between sofa and your sofa at home, right? Because sofa means eventually. And sofa is the word that they use for procrastination in Arabic. Right, so sawfa yasriqu, eventually he will steal. So that's going to automatically decide for us that it's going to be a future tense if you put sawfa. So you see sawfa in the Qur'an, right? ألهاكم التكاثر حتى زرتم المقابر كلا سوف تعلمون. Right? Indeed, you will eventually know. Or sometimes it's translated as you will soon know. Okay, so those are the three main considerations that we've done so far with regards to verbs. Today we're going to look a little bit further into the particles that cause words to become mensub, cause the verbs to become mensub, and what that means, right? And what particles cause words to become majzoom, and what that means. Okay, let's erase this. So you can if you're in your notes, you can consider this the fourth consideration. Or in Arabic, i'tibar. I'tibar is the consideration. So we can say number 4. Actually, since it's an Arabic class. Okay, number 4 is the state. Right? Al-hal. The condition of the verb. A condition or state. Okay, what is a state or a condition? For those of you who are with us in the previous class, before we started the Sarf class, we were doing grammar. In grammar, there's essentially 4 states. All right, there's marfu'. Right, marfu' are words that generally end in dhamma, right, or its equivalent. Okay, and there's mensub. Right, there are words that generally end in fatha or the equivalent. Then there's majroor or makhfood. There are words that generally end in kasra, right, or the equivalent. Right? And then there's one last one, which is majzoom, which comes from the word jazm, which is words that end in sukun or the equivalent. I'm writing this for those who haven't taken the grammar class. Okay, so these are the names of 4 different states that words can be. Right? Nouns can be any of the first 3. Right? A noun can be marfu', like I said, like we did before. Right? Daraba Zaydun. Zaydun. So Zayd has a dhamma, right? It's marfu', right? Or Allahu, right? Akbaru. Both of these words have a dhamma, they're marfu'. Okay. Right, same thing. A word can be mansub, right? And we talked about which types of words can be mansub. Right? Generally, the object is mansub, right? Daraba Zaydan, right? He hit Zayd. Zayd is the object. Mansub, it ends in a fatha. Right? Majroor will be any word that comes after a specific particle called harful jar, right? Like alhamdu lillahi. Right, so this lam here, right? It's li, and then the name of Allah, but together they're written like that. That's just to test who's paying attention. What state is alhamdu in? Alhamdu lillahi. The first word, alhamdu, what state is it in?
Marfu'.
It's marfu'. Exactly, right? It's marfu' because it has a dhamma. Lillahi, the name of Allah here, is majroor, right? Because it has a kasra. So that's essentially where the nouns stop. Nouns only have marfu', mansub, and majroor. You will never find a noun that ends in a sakin, in a sukun, right? Obviously, when you stop, you say alhamdulillah. You don't have to say the kasra, but the kasra is essentially there. If you were to write it out with all of the vowels, you would have to write the kasra. Even if you look in the Qur'an, at the end of the verse, even though you stop there, there is some sort of vowel mark, right? Unless it's a verb. Okay. Now, verbs, on the other hand, which is our discussion, can be marfu', mansub, or majzoom. Right? Not majroor. Right? A verb cannot be majroor. Okay, so this is where we're going to focus today. Right? Defaults, all verbs are marfu'. Now, when we're talking about verbs being marfu', we're talking about the mudari' verbs, the present tense verbs. Why? Because past tense verbs are they're considered unchangeable. They're stuck. They don't change according to what you put before it. So you can't put a len in front of fa'ala, right? So you can consider that the past tense are unchangeable. None of this refers to them. Right? You're not going to say that past tense is marfu', mansub. It doesn't apply. Right? They're out of the discussion. Now, present tense verbs, on the other hand, have to have one of these three states. The default is marfu'. If you put a verb and you don't put any prefix to it, and there's nothing in the sentence that indicates to the changing of its state, it'll be marfu'. So just now we wrote yasriqu. Right? This marker is a bit fake, but which out of the definitions that we've given here, which state does this apply to? Yasriqu. Does it end in a dhamma, a fatha, or a sukun? It's marfu', right? Because it ends in a dhamma. Right? Now, dhamma is the default. Right? Any verb that you put, right? Yaf'alu, right? We put just now, yaktubu. Right? So you can see the dhamma in all of these. Now, these are all singular, right? We know if you've been studying ahead with the scales that we passed out, right? You would know it's yaf'alu, yaf'alani, yaf'aluna, taf'alu, taf'alani, yaf'alna. The whole scale. These are the first. These are the singular. Right? So you can see the dhamma clear. We'll talk in a moment. What does the equivalent mean? Right? The equivalent, right, would apply to the duals or the plurals versions of these. But essentially, they're all marfu', default. If I start adding particles to the beginning of these verbs, right, then it may change. So just now we learned a particle of negation, which is len. What does len mean? What does len do to the meaning?
Future, he will never do something.
Exactly. So he will never do, which automatically, right, determines that it has to be a future translation, a future tense translation. So he will never do, right? But a len is a special type of particle that causes the verb to change from being marfu' to being mensub, right? So, and you'll see that's why, because it'll be len yasriqa, right? So this last word changes. Okay, and then, right, just to show the final example, if I take yasriqu, right, which is my default, would be a dhamma. There's nothing before it. If I add lam mim, what does it do to the meaning?
No.
Past tense.
It gives it a past tense meaning. How would you translate it? Sidi Faizan?
Lam would be not.
Yeah, it's a negation. Right, so if yasriqu is put into past tense, negative, how would you translate it?
Never.
Not never. It's a double negative.
He did not.
He did not do, right? So past tense. Right? So he did not do. Right? But lam is amongst the particles that cause the verb to be majzoom. Right? So it gets a sukoon on the end. Lam yasriq. And you, I overheard, I believe it's Sidi Faizan who was quoting Surah Al-Bayyinah, lam yakun alladhina kafaru. Right? And you have lam, then you have yakun, right? Lam yakun, sukun. However, if you look in the Qur'an, what is this teacher talking about? It's lam yakuni, right? It's not lam yakun. He must be mistaken, right? It's supposed to be lam yakun. Right? However, if you start the next letter with a sukun as well, you can't read that. You can't read two sukuns in a row, right? So they put a kasra just to make it readable. Lam yakuni alladhina, it flows. Instead of saying lam yakun alladhina kafaru. Right? That kasra is not because of any of this. It's just to facilitate the reading. That's how the Arabs spoke. Right? The state of yakun here is majzoom. It's majzoom, meaning it has a jazm, meaning a sukun. It has a sukun. Lam yakun. Right? And we'll talk about what happened to that middle letter because there was a wow in the middle, right? Kun fayakun, with a wow. Okay, so that's the overview of what we want to talk about at first. So we're going to take it piece by piece. Okay, right, so we mentioned that lam is one of the examples of a particle that you can add prior to the verb to change the verb's meaning to the future meaning, which means never. Right? But there are other particles as well, right? And that len, as well as the others, changes the verb from being marfu', which is the default, having a dhamma, to mensub, having a fatha or the equivalent. Okay, so the particles which cause verbs to become mensub are the following. Right? So first you have len, we did that already, means never. Right? The second is en. Now en can be translated as that or to. Let me see if this marker is better than the previous. Yeah, okay. Okay, so en is usually used in conjunction with other words in a sentence, right? So if I wanted to say, for instance, I wanted to talk to him, right? Aradtu, past tense again, right? So aradtu en. I wanted to talk. How do I say talk? Does anyone know how to say talk? I talk. I am talking. Right, so it's takallama, form 5. Takallama. يتكلم. So if you look at your charts, you'll see that form 5 is تفعل يتفعل. يتكلم with a dhamma. So that's your mudari', right? I'm going to say I am speaking, so I'm going to change the pronoun. Right? أردت أن أتكلم would be the default, but because I have N, it's أتكلم. It's Mensub. I wanted to talk. Right, so you can see that the translation tends to be more toward a root noun translation. And that's one of the wisdoms of the N, because the N is sometimes called the N of the root noun. Right? I wanted to talk, as opposed to translating it as I wanted that I can talk. Right? Right? Lahu, right? To him, for instance. Or you can just say, right? أتكلمه. You can just put the pronoun directly. To talk to him. Okay. Right, so that's N. Right? N has other usages, and we'll see that when we go into the application of these things, and which we're going to try to do. All right. The third example is K. Now, K comes in the Qur'an a lot. And K is, right, kaf, ya. Kaf, ya. Right, Allah says, right, K, I'm going to write it separate, but it's written joined in the Qur'an. K la ta'saw ala ma fatakum. Right, we haven't done it yet, but this is one of the equivalents of the fatha. Right, let's use an example. We'll put that example up again. Hadartu, right? I attended. What does hadar mean? Hadir mean. Or hazir in Urdu.
Present.
Present, right? So if you were somehow born in an Arab country, right, and you were in class right now at high school or something, and the teacher would do the attendance, right, he would call your name, and you would either say hadir, or you wouldn't say anything because you're not there. Right, hadir means I'm present. Hadartu means I attended. Right, hadartu, right, ad-dars, I attended the class. Ad-darsa, it's the object. Right. K, so that. I didn't tell you the meaning. K means so that. Right. Ata'allama. Ta'allama, yata'allamu means to study. Right. Normally it would be ata'allamu, I am studying. Ata'allamu, I am studying. But because of the K, the dhamma is changed to a fatha. And this verb is Mensub, because it's preceded by a particle that causes the words to become Mensub. They're called harf nasab. I can write that here if you wish. Harf, or huruf if it's plural. Nasab. Okay, so that's the third one. Sometimes you'll see in the Qur'an that it's written like, right? And that's just emphasis. Right? So essentially it's the same word. Okay, and then the last one is idhan. Idhan is not that common. Okay, so you can say, for instance, hafiztu. What does hafiztu mean?
To protect.
Hafiz.
Yeah, so to protect, or what other word do we use when we say hafiz?
To remember.
Good.
Memorize.
I protected.
Yeah, so I memorized, which essentially means I have it protected in my mind. So that's why the hafiz al Qur'an, right? is the protector of the Qur'an, because it's protected in their memory. No matter how many copies are changed or destroyed, they can never take it away because it's protected in their mind. Right? But it essentially, the root word, it means either to protect or to memorize. Right? So, hafiztu darsi, I memorized my lesson. Right? So, the particle idhan is usually used in a dialogue. So you would use it as a response to something someone else said. So say person A or person Alif said, hafiztu darsi. Right? I memorized my lesson. Right? And person B says, idhan. They reply, idhan tufliha. Tufliha. What does falah mean? Anyone? Hayya ala al-falah.
Success.
Success. Right. So falah in verb form is aflaha yuflihu. Right. Aflaha yuflihu. Right. So we have in the Qur'an, qad aflaha man zakkaha. Right. Successful indeed is the one who purifies it, meaning their soul, their nafs. Right. So Ahmed says, hafiztu darsi. Right. His sister Aisha, she says, idhan tufliha. Right? In that case, you'll be successful. Right? You can translate it as in that case or therefore, or you'll be successful. Again here, tufliha with a fatha. It was tuflihu, meaning you will be successful. Tuflihu. For those who want to know, it's form 4. Aflaha yuflihu. Right, so yuflihu, yuflihani, yuflihuna, tuflihu. Tuflihani, yuflihna, tuflihu. Right, anta. Okay, so you can see why that's not as common, because it tends to only be used in context of a dialogue. Right, it is used in the Qur'an. Right. وَنَحْنُ عُصْبَةٌ إِنَّا إِذًا لَمِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. Right, but it's used with a nominal sentence and not a verb. Okay. So that's the idea, right? If you have any of these verbs or any of these particles prior to your verb, right, obviously they would only come prior to a mudari' verb, then that mudari' verb automatically becomes mansub, which means that it will have a fatha if it's singular, right? Or the equivalent to a fatha if it's dual or plural. Now, one of the things that we've been talking about are the different types of letters that make up words. Right? So we talked about sound letters, which are all letters except for the sikh letters, the alif, waw, and ya, and also excluding the hamza. Okay? And then we also talked about doubled letters. Right? So we want to see what does it look like when each of these types of words is mansub. Okay. Right, so but first let's look at the singular. Right, so if a verb is singular, right, so here we have the verb yaktubu. Yaktubu is mudari'. It's marfu' with a dhamma, yaktubu. But we're putting lan in front of it, so you see lan yaktuba. Right? Yaktub is singular. So yaktubu, yaktubani, yaktubuna. Right? He is writing. But once you put the lan, it changes from to yaktubu with a dhamma to yaktuba with a fatha. Right? Right? And that applies to all singular verbs. So let's just write out what are the singular verbs real quick. And they're called the af'al khamsa. Right? Actually, they're opposite the af'al khamsa. Right? So you have yaktubu, which is he. Right? He, one man, is writing. Then you have taktubu, which comes after it, which means she is writing. Right? Each of these with their own corresponding pronoun. Hiya, she. Right? Then you have another taktubu, and be careful, they're written exactly the same. Right? and you have to see the context, because this one means anta, you, one man, right? Masculine, second person, singular. Then you have aktubu, right? Which means I am writing. Okay. Even though it's not singular, naktubu has the same result, right? We, because there's no additional word letters on the end of it. So nahnu. Okay, so he, she, you, one male. Right? I'm missing one actually. Right? There's one missing. Tek. Tubina is not there, right? Because it ends in a noon. Right? So these 5, they don't end in any other letter except for the root letter. So you can see that you have the 3 root letters in a row, and there's no additional letters on the end. Right? So these 5, right? Whenever they're mensub, you'll see a fatha clear as day. Right? So lan yaktuba, lan taktuba, lan taktuba, lan aktuba, lan naktuba. Right? Because they end in their original letter. There's no additional letters on the end. Generally, letters are added to the end to change from singular to dual to plural, as we'll see in a second. Right? So if it is dual or plural, right, then how would you know if it's mensub? Right? Obviously, one way to know that it's mensub. Does anyone mind if I erase this? I'm going to kind of have to. Sorry. Don't worry, much more will be written of the same accord. So if it's dual or plural, it's easier if I have the whole chart written out, but I'm not going to write the whole thing. So yaktubu, yaktubani. Just to get some feedback from you guys, how many of you have received and started to memorize the charts that we gave out, the different forms? That's scary. Anyone?
There's 2 hands up.
2 hands. Okay, good. 3 hands. I can see the hands. Okay, good. Right, so and start with form 1, right? Past tense and present tense. If you can get that, all of the rest are easy. You're just tweaking one letter or not, or another letter, right? Whereas the endings are all the same, right? So in the past tense, in the present tense, right? It starts out like this: yaktubu, yaktubani, yaktubuna. Yaktubu is the one we're just explaining. That if you have a len on it or any word like it that just ends in the ba, right? The root letters being kaf, ta, right, and ba. Right? It ends in the last letter of the word itself, right? So that last letter just changes to a fatha very easily. Right? If you put a lan, it becomes lan yaktuba. However, you'll see other words that have, right, ani or una or ina in the rest of the charts. So yaktubu, yaktubani, yaktubuna, taktubu, again another singular, taktubani, another dual, yaktubna, that one has a noon on the end. That one's, right, a tricky one. We'll talk about that. Then taktubu, taktubani, taktubuna, taktubina, right? Taktubani, taktubana, aktubu, naktubu. All the ones that end in a ba, right, or their root letter, right, they get a fatha. The ones that land in a noon, right, if you make it mensub, right, the noon falls off. Okay, right. So your yaktubani, right? Those 2 men are writing. Right. I wanted to say that they never wrote. They will never write. Lan yaktuba. Right, I take off the noon. Or they will never write, plural. Lan yaktubu. right, which will generally be written with an alif at the end. And that alif is just to signify that that waw is not a root letter. It's a letter that shows plurality. So, does that make sense to everyone? We can make more examples if you wish to clarify. Okay. We have one affirmation. So, right, so anyone that has ends in a noon, the noon falls off if you make it mansub, with one exception. And we'll mention that exception shortly. Right, so yaktubani becomes lan yaktuba, and yaktubuna becomes lan yaktubu. The noons fall off. The third is the feminine plural, right? The famous feminine plural. Let's write the feminine third person, which is taktubu. The next three down on the scale. Right. She, taktubani, and then yaktubna. So for those of you memorizing, this is the tricky one, because it goes ta, ya. Right. Yaktubna. Okay, so she is writing, right? Those two women are writing, and those three or more women are writing. This is a feminine plural. Those three or more women. This is the third person. You'll see later on there's another one which is similar, which is taktubna. Right, it has the same setup, except that this is the second person feminine plural, antunna. Now, why are these exceptions to the rule? Right? These noons never fall off, no matter what you do. Right? If you put len here, len taktubani becomes len taktuba. The noon falls off. Right? If you put len here or here, right, it remains the same. Len yaktubana. Why? This noon, right, is what's considered unchangeable. Just like we mentioned previously, that the past tense are all unchangeable. You'll never see daraba become darabu, right, with a dhamma, or darabi. It'll never change. Daraba will always be daraba. Darabu, right, daraba, darabu, they will never change. Whatever they are, they stay like that. Right? They are unchangeable. In Arabic, that's called mabni. Okay, and if you want to know what kind of words are mabni, right, the easiest way to know, the easiest breakdown without too many details is all past tense verbs are mabni. All present tense feminine plurals are mabni. So that's the third person and the second person. Right, yaf'alna and taf'alna, they're mabni. And all particles are mabni. Okay, other than that, right, there's a few exceptions, but generally everything else can change between the different states. So if you see this type of word, right, it stays the same. That noon will not fall off. So let's ask, how do I know that lan yaktubana is mansub and not marfu'? Mariah? Sister Mariah? How do I know that lan yaktubana, or actually, how do I know that lan taktuba is not marfu', is not the default? How do I know it's not just the normal way it's supposed to be?
I mean, just looking at it, I mean, the one ends in a fatha and the other one's like an aleph. It's not a dhamma.
Exactly, right? So there's something missing, right? Something dropped off, right? Which was the original noon. Right, so, right. But if I said the same for this question, right, the only thing that would give it away is that there's a len there. Right? As soon as you see the len, you know that the verb is mansub, because len is a particle that makes the verb mansub. Right? However, when you put it in other types of verbs, like here, if I put it here, right? If I put it on the singular or the dual, right? right, then you'll see the fatha, that's a giveaway, right? Or you'll see that the noon fell off. That's another giveaway. Right? But here, you won't see any noon fell off, you won't see any vowels change, but you still have the len there. Right? You can see the len. Good. Alhamdulillah. Right, so those are, right, that's with regards to the regular noun, the regular verbs. Right, but we talked about verbs that end in weird letters, right? Either the sikh letters, the alif, the waw, and the ya, and they're actually called the sikh letters, right? One of my teachers, he likened the sikh letters to the student. One small, right, tiny headache and they fall off, right? They're missing in class. Same thing with the sikh letters, right? One small change and the letter falls off. That's the nature of the Arabic. Right, so here we have a few examples of the sikh letters. Okay, so this whole time we've been using yaktubu, right? Yaktubu, right, is called sahih. It's a word full of sound letters. All the letters are strong letters. Kaf, ta, ba, they won't fall off, right? But a sikh letter is either the waw, right, the ya, or the alif. So a word that ends in these letters, right, those letters are quickly affected by anything that you put on it. Right, so let's give an example of each. Right, a word that ends in a waw, a mudari', present tense verb that ends in a waw, right, yad'u. Yad'u means to make dua. He is praying. Right. Yas'a. Yas'a ends in an alif. Right. Right. It's an alif, but it's seated on what looks like a ya because the root letters are actually seen ayn ya. But the Arabs don't say, they won't say sa'ya or yes ayu. They would not say yes. Right, yes ayu. It's not fluent at all. Right? It's very difficult to say yes ayu. Right? But that's essentially how it was. Yaf'alu, yes ayu. Right? But because it's difficult, they changed this ya to a sikh letter that matches the vowel before it. Yes a. Okay? And then what's left? So we have waw, we have alif, and we need a ya. Right? We'll be practicing these types of words as we go along. Right? Yajri. Yajri means to flow or to run. Right? Originally it was yajriyu. Again, they don't like that emphasis on that last letter. Yajri is much easier to say. Yajri. Right? In the Qur'an, tajri min tahtiha al-anhar. Right? Rivers flow beneath them. Right? Gardens beneath which rivers flow. Okay. So this is how these words are normally. Right? Lan yad'u, or sorry, yad'u, he is making dua, he is supplicating. Yas'a, he is running or striving. Yajri, he is, or it is flowing, or he is running, essentially you could say. Now if right, these are all marfu'. Now you can see, right, you can't really see a dhamma, right, but these are special types of words. Right? We'll go into more detail later about why is there no dhamma. Right? We explained a little bit that it was yas'ayu, yajriyu, yad'u, right? But that's difficult, so it was changed, even though the default was the dhamma. Right? Now, but if I put a len in front of it, right, now what happens? Right? If this was a normal word, what would happen? They're all singular. Let's just give some more space. If this was yaktubu, what would happen? Anyone?
It becomes Mensub, I think.
Yeah, it would be Mensub, right? So, but because yaktubu is our normal letters, you would see yaktuba. You would see the fatha, right? Because Mensub is fatha or the equivalent. Equivalent would be the noon dropping off, right? So we didn't mention that. right? The noon dropping off, that's the equivalent. Right? So you would see a fatha, yaktuba, clear as day, yaktuba. Right? But what about these kind of letters? Right? Same thing. Right? You would say yad'uwa, lan yajri ya. But this one won't change because it's already an alif. Alif and fatha are very close. Right? So lan yad'uwa. Lan yad'uwa. Even though normally you wouldn't pronounce a vowel on that last letter. Right? But the fatha is not that difficult to pronounce. Yad'uwa. Right? Lan yajriya. Right? Lan yas'a. The second group of verbs on the slide is words that end in double letters. Right? Now, I don't expect anyone to like completely encompass all of this and know it perfectly like their social security number or something like that. Right? No, I just want to be known so that if you look in the Qur'an and you see something, that why is this word different than other words, right? You have some sort of background knowledge to build on, right? And we're starting with these different things so that later on we can build on them, and then there will essentially be nothing that you haven't heard of, right? And that's one of the most important parts of knowledge, that you at least know that it exists, right? Especially in Arabic. And that's the idea that like knowledge is taken in layers. Okay. The second was the doubled letters, which is in Arabic mudha'af. Mudha'af. Mudha'af words are letters that have double, right, of the same letter. Right? Di'af is double, the same word. So you have, for instance, madda. What is a mad in tajweed? When you're reading the Qur'an, when you see a mad, what do? Stretch, right? So madda means to stretch. So you can say madda yadahu, he stretched out his hand, or maddat yadaha, she stretched out her hand. Right? So madda is the past tense. It was madada. Right? But you have two letters that are the same, right? It's easier to just join them within a tashdid, madda. Instead of madada, madada, madadu, you say madda, madda, maddu. It's much easier. But the present tense is what we want to talk about, right? Which is yamuddu. What was the original? Right? So if we're basing this off of, right, fa'ala and yaf'alu, right, those are our templates, right? What would be the original of yamuddu, right? Sorry, that's a mistake. Yamuddu, right? Had it not been for this double letter. Anyone can give a guess?
Yamdadu.
Yamdadu, good. Yamdadu or yamdudu. It would be like nasara yansuru. Good. Right, so yamdudu becomes, right, they take the two letters that have the same two vowels, they squish them together with a tashdid, which is called idgham, which you see in the Qur'an, being done in tajweed. Yamuddu. Madda yamuddu. Right, and yamuddu is in the Qur'an. فَلْيَمْدُدُ لَهُ الرَّحْمَنُ madda. Right, so madda yamuddu. Past tense, unchangeable. You can't put a len, right? Nothing can change the past tense. Even if you put a ma, it doesn't change it. It's not a particle that will change the state of the verb after it. Okay, but if you put a len on yamuddu, we have a big problem. Not as big yet, right? There's a way out. Okay. So how do I change yamuddu to be mensub? Yamudda, good. Right. We'll talk about majzoom in a second. When it becomes a sukun, and then we'll revisit yamuddu. Okay, and then the last one is if it ends in a hamza. Essentially, it doesn't The hamza on the end, on the last letter, doesn't change anything. It acts just like a sound letter. Lan yabda'a. Right? He will never start. Right? So if you want the meanings, lan yad'uwa, he will never call. Right? Or by call, like you can mean either a call for someone or call upon someone, which is a supplication. Lan yamudda, he will never stretch or stretch out. Lan yamudda yadahu, he will never stretch out his hand. Right? Lan yabda'a, he will never start. So, the next is the same idea, but with jazm, with majzoom. Right? So an, lan, k, and idhan make the verb after it, make the mudari' verb after it mensub. Right? Now, which letters? Sorry, there's a mistake on the slide. The title should be jazm, and the particles of jazm. Okay, so the particles which cause verbs to become majzoom, which means to end in a sukun or the equivalent. To end in a sukun or the equivalent. Right, what are they? We have the first one, which we've talked about already, lam. Right, lam yaf'al, sukun. Right, lam yaktub. Okay, we have in. Right, in here would be an in of condition, if. And that's generally only an if-then statement. So you say, if you sit, I will sit. In tajlis, ajlis. If you sit, I will sit. And so let's write that so you can see. Right? Allah says that He's the one who taught by the pen, which is an indication to write things down. Right? So let's use them. Lam, right? We gave an example. Lam yaktub. Right? He did not write. Past tense translation. Right? In is used as a condition. Right? So if, conditional. Right? So if you sit, how do you say to sit in Arabic? Anyone?
Jalasa.
Jalasa. How do you say in present tense?
Yajlisu.
Yajlisu. Okay. I'm going to put, right? So if he sits, so that's yajlis, right? Yajlisu. But I want it to be a majzoom because the in is there. How do I write it? In yaj? Lis. Right? In yajlis, ajlis. Right? This is called a conditional sentence. Right? So both the if and the then statements are majzoom. Right? Once you have that in. إِن يَسْرِقْ فَقَدْ سَرَقَ أَخُوهُ مِنْ قَبْلُ. Right? If he sits, I sit. I will sit. In yajlis, sukun, right? Majzoom, right? Ajlis. Then I will sit. Right? So that's usually used in the conditional sentence. And if then. The next one is lamma, which means has yet. Right? Usually it's used within the context of a full paragraph or a full sentence. In the Qur'an, Allah mentions about people who claim to be believers, right? And Allah says, don't say that you're believers, say that you're merely, don't say that you're firm, strong believers, like to the fullest of faith, rather just say that you're Muslim, right? And Allah says, the reason, He says, وَلَمَّا, right? And, right? لما يدخل الإيمان في قلوبهم. Sorry, we need to get some new markers. Right. ولما يدخل الإيمان في قلوبهم. Okay. Again, I wrote the sukun on the yadkhul, but if you look in the Qur'an, it's written with a kasra. Same idea that you can't read two sukuns in a row. The kasra is just to facilitate continuance of reading. Lam yadkhulil is possible. Lam yadkhul and starting with a sukun on the next word is not possible. So the kasra there, right, is incidental. It's not part of the grammar. Right? And faith has yet to enter into their hearts. Right, so faith, al-iman, has yet, right, has yet to enter, dakhala yadkhulu, to enter, right, into, fi qulubihim, into their heart, again, right here, majroor. Right, nouns can be majroor, but verbs cannot. Right here is a noun that is marfu'. Right, and here is a verb that is majzoom, because of lamma. Right, so everything has, right, both nouns and verbs always have a state, and depending on which one will allow you to read and translate properly. Right, so that's a combination of grammar and sarf. So lamma, and then the last one is al-lam lil-amr, the lam of command. The lam of command. Right, al-amr is command. Al-lam is the proper name for the letter. Okay, so that's lamma, and then we'll write the last example on the bottom so that they're all there. The lam of command is used to for when you're commanding somebody. Generally, you command people that are present. So if you command someone to do it, generally it's a second person command. Write, meaning you write. Right? Uktub, ijlis, sit down. You're speaking to a person who's present. There is a method of a third person command in Arabic, which is translated more of a suggestion. Right? So we have the famous hadith that Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir, whoever believes in Allah on his last day, فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ. Then let them say the good, or let them be quiet. So let them be quiet is a third person command. It's a suggestion. Right? And the verb is li yasmut. Right? Samata yasmutu, right, is the verb. Li, right? Li yasmut. Right? Then he should be silent. Right? Samata yasmutu. Right? This becomes yasmut. Li yasmut. Right? So this is the lam of command. And because of that, the verb is majzoom. Does that make sense? Anyone have any questions up to here? We're going to see how these apply to the same types of words as before. Okay. Don't be shy to ask any questions, right, or comments or critiques. So looking at the slide, just give me 1 second. So looking at the slide, right, we have examples of different types of words according to their letter makeup. Right? So again, if it's singular, then the final letter gets a. Sorry, this is a mistake. There's a mistake, right? These should all be, right? It should say when a verb becomes majzoom, right? Because we're talking about jazm now. Apologies, right? If it's singular, then the final letter gets a sukun, a sakin, right? A sukun, right? So lam yaktub, right? So the Arabic is correct, right? So lam yaktub, right? So you can see it's singular, right? The final letter gets a sukun, and that applies to yaktub, taktub, right? Taktub, aktub, naktub, right? Any letter that doesn't have an alif or a noon or an alif noon or a waw noon on the end. Right? If it's dual or plural, which are the ones that have the alif noon or the waw noon on the end, right? Then that noon will fall off just like it did in the Mensub. Lam yaktuba and lam yaktubu. Right? It was yaktubani, yaktubuna. You put a lam yaktuba. So if you see a word yaktuba and the noon fell off, or yaktubu and there's no noon, then look to before it. Right? If there's a len, it's mansub. If it's a lem, right, or any of the others, then it's majzoom. Right? So you can tell, even though it looks essentially the same, you can tell by what prefaces it. And then if it's the feminine plural, either third person or second person, then that won't change at all. It'll be lam yaktubna, lam taktubna. That noon is unchangeable. It's called mabni. Right, so that's with regards to regular words, the regular letters. Again, these are all examples of sound letters, right, where the word ends in strong letters. If we want to give examples of what we did before, if it ends in sick letters, so let's just erase this. Right, if it ends in sick letters, again, right, when it was mansub, right, the sick letters changed to a fatha, right? But if it's majzoom, right, so we have our three examples. Yad'u, he is calling, right? Yajri, right, he is running or it is flowing. And yas'a, right, he is striving. Yas'a bayna aydihim wa bi aymanihim in the Qur'an. Yas'a nuruhum bayna aydihim. Their light will emanate from before them. Right? But if you put a lam on these, again, because of lam causing such a change on the word, the sick letters don't hold up. They just fall off. Lam yad'u, right? Lam yajri becomes lam yajri with a kasra, right? And then lam yas'a becomes lam yas'a. Obviously, it would be written like this, right? Lam yad'u. Okay, lam yajri, lam yasma', lam yas'a, sorry. Right, so if it's singular, the final letter falls off. Right, if it's dual or plural, the noon just falls off. Everything stays the same. Like for instance, if it's yad'una, right? Yad'una rabbahum khawfan wa tama'a. They are calling upon their Lord. Yad'una rabbahum. Rabbahum. Right, again, right, the object is always mansub. Yad'una rabbahum. They are calling upon their Lord. This is plural. Right, wow, noon. If I put a lam here, the noon falls off. Right? Nothing else changes. Now, here's a trivia question. In the Qur'an, it's written like that. Right? Sorry, this specific verse is not in the Qur'an. But if the Qur'an would write it like that, had this been the proper verse, right, it would have an alif at the end. The original was, the singular is yad'u like that with no alif. Right? People always ask, what is that alif for? Right? We see the same alif in the past tense scale. Fa'ala, fa'ala. What's next? What's the third one? Fa'ala, fa'ala. Sorry?
Fa'alu.
Fa'alu. How do you spell fa'alu?
Wow, and then alif after that.
Good. All right, with an alif after. Why is there an alif there? I kind of hinted to it just now. I don't know if you caught it or not.
I guess to show that the wow wasn't really part of the original.
Exactly. Right. Extra points to you. Right. The alif is there to show that wow is not one of the root letters. Right? That wow is just, right, the wow of plural. Right? You added that wow to the fa'ala to make it fa'alu, which is plural. The root letters are fa, ayn, lam. Now here, right, the singular, right, he is calling. The root letters are dal, ayn, wow. There's no alif because the wow is part of the word. Right? But this wow, this one, there's an alif. Why? Right? We have the lam in front because the noon dropped off. Right? Now that wow is not part of the word. Right? Because if you want to really break it down, right, it was yad'u, yad'u, the original. Correct? Yaf'alu, yad'u. Yad'uwani, Right? What would be the third one? Yad'u, yad'uwani, yad'u. Yeah, yad'u wuna. What do we see there? What do we have two of?
Wow.
Two vowels. Arabs don't like that. I don't actually either. Maybe because I'm Arabicized, right? But they don't speak like that. Right? Nobody would want to say, right, give a khutbah saying yad'uuna. Right? That would be too difficult. Right? So what happens? Right? It drops off. Right? Yad'uuna. Right? So the one that dropped off was the root letter. Right? We'll take that in a bit. Sorry, I want to get carried away. But you can see, if it's a noon on the end, the noon falls off. Right? Khalas. Right? So same like when it's Mensub, if it's majzoom and singular, right, the last letter falls off. The sixth letter falls off. If it's dual or plural, then just the noon falls off like normal. So here's singular, yad'u with a waw, change to yad'u. Right? Yajri, yas'a, lam yas'a. Again, don't worry if it's too much. You'll have time to revise. Whatever's on the slides is mainly what you should know. Right? The extra stuff is just to give it more color. Now the next one is the double letter. Right? So yamuddu. There's a lot of examples of this in the Qur'an. Right? Yashukku, which means to be burdensome. Right? Yashukku. Okay, so you have two letters. Again, if we broke it down like we did before, it would be yaf'ulu or yashkuku. Right, sorry, yamdudu, yashkuku. So if you make it majzoom, right, you can't do this. Why can't you do that? Right, we know that the lam makes the last the verb after it majzoom, which is usually a sakin. Right? It's represented by a sakin or the equivalent. Right? But why can't I just put a sakin on this letter?
One dal is missing.
One dal is missing. What do you mean?
That would, as in, if you put a sakin on there, then it's showing one dal.
Okay, I think I understand. Yeah. So, right, so the dal with the tashdid on it is essentially two dals. And this applies to every tashdid that you see. Right? Any word, any letter that has a tashdid on it, right? You can break it down, right, to this. Right? So if it's like that, for instance, right? So it's two tashdids. The first one has a sukoon. The second one has your vowel. Right? So if we did it to this, it would be so this would break down to that. Okay? Lam. Oh, sorry. It would be. Okay? Lam yamud do. Lam yamud do. That's essentially what that's saying, right? If it was like this, as it was before. Lam yam, right? Let me see, take out the lam. Yamuddu is yamuddu. All tashdeeds are two letters. The first one is sukoon. If I put a sukoon on the end, right, of this, what happens? If I say, can you read that? Can you read that? Right, so, no, as my teacher would say, and he was very comical while teaching, he'd say that you would probably break your wudu if you tried to read that. Right? Right, so that's essentially what you're doing if you do that. If you just put a sukoon on lam yamud, you can't say it. It's not pronounceable. Right? Lam yamud, you can't do it. Right, so what happens with dual letters, right, is that you have two options. you have two options of how to pronounce a dual letter when it's majzoom. Let's write them out. Right, so the first option is that you can put, right, so you take your yamuddu and change it to yamudda, right? Now, this is just a dispensation, just for concession, just to be able to pronounce it. Because you can't put a sukoon. That's not an option. You can't have the tashdid and the sukoon at the same time. So you can say lam yamudda. And that is, the Arabs did use that. They just use a fatha. It's the closest thing, right, that is pronounceable, right, in exchange for the actual sukoon. Right. The other way you can do it, which is also how it's done in the Qur'an and in some verses, is you can open the tajdeed. You can separate the two dals and say lam yamdud. Lam yamdud. You can do that as well. Right, so if you say yashuqu, you can say lam yashukka or lam yashquq. Lam yashquqa. Right. The word for doubts in Arabic is shak. Right? Or one of the words for doubts is shak. Right? In present tense would be yashukku. Yashukku. Right? If I made it lam, I could say lam yashukka. That's the concession, like that. Or I can say lam yashkuk. Right, you have two options. You can either open the tashdid, or you can take the concession and just make it a fatha. Right, we see this in the Qur'an, right? Allah says, right, فَلْيَمْدُدْ لِيَمْدُدْ. We just did that, the lam of command, the third person command, لِيَمْدُدْ, right, is in the Qur'an. Right, then let them stretch. Right? فَلْيَمْدُدْ إِلَى السُّقْ فَلْيَمْدُدْ لَهُ مِنَ الرَّحْمَنِ مَدَّةً. And then the hamza is not, was it? فَلْيَمْدُدْ لَهُ الرَّحْمَنُ مَدَّةً. Right, then let the most merciful, right, stretch or expand for them. So, and then lam yabda, right, is essentially acts, like, nothing changes. Right? Lam yabda. There's a hadith that kullu amrin ذي بال, every matter of importance, lam yubda fihi bi bismillah, which is not begun in the name of Allah, fahuwa abtar, then it is cut off from blessing. Just quickly, I want to mention this. Words that have a sick letter in the middle, right, like these are the most common, right? Right? These are past tense verbs, right? The Arabs don't say it like this, right? The kawana, right, they say kana, which means, right, to be, or he was, right? Qawala, they say qala. So you say qala Allah, right? Allah said, right, or Allah says, right? So, right, the present tense would be, right, yakunu, or yaqulu. So you can see the waw returns. What happens if I put a lam here or a lam here? Anyone want to give it a guess? What do I do to these verbs now that I've added lam? First, is lam nasab, mensub, or is lam called majzoom? Which one was it?
Mensub.
Majzoom, good. Right, so how do I make yakunu majzoom or yaqulu majzoom?
I drop the wow and it becomes lam yaqul.
Good, right? You dropped the waw. Now, why can't I just do this? Just make the last letter sukoon. Right, just like I did lam yaktub.
Because it looks like two sukoons in a row.
Exactly. Two sukoons in a row is haram, right? Not allowed. From the time of Adam alayhi salam, right, to the end of the world, you're not allowed to have two sukoons in a row like this. Right? So now, Now let's think about this. 2 sukoons in a row. Okay, one of them's got to go. Which one goes? The noon or the sikh letter? Sikh letter. Good. Right. So we see in the Qur'an, and somebody quoted it earlier. Right. And Surah Bayyinah, how does Surah Bayyinah start? Lam yakun alladhina. So lam yakun. It's not lam yakun, because you can't have that. Lam yakun alladhina. Right. The waw dropped off for that reason, because if it didn't, it would have 2 sukoon in a row, and that is not allowed. Right. When that happens, something's got to go. The sikh letter is the first to fall. The noon can hold its own. Right. So you see this. You'll see this in the Qur'an. Right. If the middle letter was a ya, it also applies. Right. So yasiru means he is becoming. Right. Yabi'u means he is selling. Right. These are both examples of letters that have a sikh letter in the middle. If I put a lam on them, right, what do they become if I put the lam? What should they be? If I want to say he did not become, or he did not sell, how do I say it in Arabic? You can do the steps if you wish. Put this 2 sukoons in a row and then drop the sikh letter. Anyone give it a shot?
So turning the ra into a sukoon and then dropping the ya.
Okay, so how do you pronounce the end in the end?
Lam yasir.
Lam yasir. And the second example?
So I can't see it properly.
Oh, it's yabi'u. Yabi'u. Sorry.
Yabi'u. So then adding that sukoon to the ayn,
Yeah.
and then we drop the ya.
Exactly.
So lam yabi'.
Good. Right, lam. Right, yabi'. Lam yabi'. Right. So now a diligent person, right? They're looking at the Qur'an. When they're reading the Qur'an, now they're reading with the lens of sarf. Right? They know that that no verb is less than 3, and that has less than 3 root letters. There's no such thing as a verb with less than 3 letters. Then they come across lam yabi'. Sorry, this should be a kasra. Lam yabi'. Right? They know that ya is just the pronoun he. Right? It just indicates to the pronoun. Right? And that the root letters start after the ya. But there's only 2. Right? So what would be the first thing that came to your mind when you only see two root letters remaining? What happened? A sikh letter or something dropped off, right? Obviously, most likely a sikh letter, right? Right. So if you wanted to figure out what lam yabi' means, and you had no previous knowledge of the word, right? It could either be ba waw ayn or ba ya ayn. Right. Then once you get to the dictionary and you look up ba waw ayn, and it tells you it's the knuckle on the outside of your wrist, you'll know that that's probably not what I'm looking for. So you go to ba ya ayn, it means to sell. Okay, lam yabi', right? He did not sell. Okay, match the context. That's the word I'm looking for. Right. So you kind of have to figure out what that middle letter is. Fastest way to figure it out is if the vowel before it is a kasra, the middle letter was a ya. If it's a dhamma, it was a waw. Right? That's a general rule. Tamam. Let's just quickly finish the last things. Again here, just to reiterate, right? You can see it on the slide, that if the tashdid of the doubled letter are open, right? The tashdid of the doubled letters are opened when 2 sukoon collide. Right? This is called ijtima' as-sakinain, right? Or iltiqa' as-sakinain. Right? So here we're just showing in the past tense, because past tense is fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alata, fa'alna. Okay? If we're doing it with doubled letters, right? It'll be madda, madda, maddu, maddat, maddata, and then we have a problem. That 6th one is an issue. Right? The sixth one is an issue because, right, and it's fa'alna. Okay. If I say, and if I'm using madda, I can't do this. Again, before, like we said before, you can't have a tashdid and a sukoon at the same time. Right? So what do you do when you get to fa'alna? Fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alata, fa'alna. The sixth one down, which is the feminine plural of the past tense. Right? So if you're using double letters, what happens is that the tashdid is opened. You can see on the slide, right? Fa'alna, or if you're using the present tense, yaf'alna, and both of those are the feminine plural, right? The tashdid is opened, like we did just now when we say lam yamdud, lam yamdud. Right, so right, you have on the right side past tense, madda, we're keeping the tashdid all the way up to the sixth one. So madda, madda, maddu, maddat, maddata, and then we have to open it up because you can't have a sukoon on the tashdid. Maddadna, maddadta, maddadtuma, maddadtuma, maddadtum, maddadti, maddadtuma, maddadtunna, maddadtu, maddanna. So you open it up. On the left side, you have the mudari', which is yamuddu, yamuddani, yamudduna. So everything's good. Tamuddu, tamuddani, but then yaf'alna. Right? You have to open it. Yamdudna. And then you can go back. Tamuddu, tamuddani, tamudduna, tamuddina, tamuddani. Again, taf'alna, the feminine plural. Tamdudna, amuddu, namuddu. So we wanted to practice the charts. How many people memorized at least Form 1, past and present? So 1, 2, 3, 4. Anyone else? Anyone did not get the 5? Did anyone not get the handout? It should have been sent by email. Okay, so right, because of time, we're going to turn what we're going to do in class into a kind of a take-home project. So if you see the slide, what we want to do, right, we'll break it down here, that we want to be able to say the full Form 1 scale, both past and present, with sound letters. Right? So normal letters, like fa'ala, kataba, yaktubu, and daraba, any word that you want. Right? Leave out the words that have the 6 letters. Right? They can be challenging. Right, so this is the first focus, to be able to say the scale, fa'ala, fa'ala, fa'alu, fa'alat, fa'alata, fa'alna, fa'alta, fa'altuma, fa'altum, fa'alti, fa'altuma, fa'altunna, fa'altu, fa'alna, or yaf'alu, yaf'alani, yaf'aluna, taf'alu, taf'alani, yaf'alna, taf'alu, taf'alani, taf'aluna, taf'alina, taf'alani, taf'alna, yaf'alu, naf'alu. It doesn't have to be fast like that, right? Just fluent, right? Fluid, right? Smooth. Right? So you want it to be such that you don't really have to think too much. So it's not like yaf'alu, okay, next is, I think, yaf'alani. Or you want to try to work until you can overcome any thought, any thinking. So it becomes second nature. Right. The second practice, right, which we're going to work our way up to, and we'll do next week, inshaAllah ta'ala. If you can see on the slide, that's to be able to do those same exact scales, but with words that end in the 6 letters. Right. So if we have like da'a yad'u, it ends in a wow. So da'a, da'awa, da'aw, da'at, da'ata, da'awna, da'awta, da'awtama, da'awtum, da'awti, da'awtama, da'awtunna, da'awtu, da'awna. Right. We'll work our way to that. Yad'u, yad'uwani, yad'uuna, tad'u, tad'uwani, yad'una. We'll work our way to that, inshallah. We'll do that in class next week. Right, so practice number 1 is for you guys at home. Right, to make that strong as possible. Right, if you haven't memorized it yet, then you can take 3 a day. right? فعل فعل فعلوا فعل فعل فعلوا فعل فعل فعلوا. Just learn that one that day. Add the next 3 the next day, then the next 3. There's only 14, right? Past and present. Once you learn those, form 2 to 10, they'll be a cinch. And then the last on the slide is, right, the third practice is we're going to do this again also together in class, but you can start to practice it because it's not beyond your abilities if you've memorized the forms, form 1, past and present. Right, so to say the full form 1 scale using the particles of nasab and jazm. So you can practice with just len and lem, right, for both sound and sikh letters. Right, start with the sound letters. So I'll just give one example. Kataba yaktubu. Right, so for this third one, you're only going to use the present tense because the particles of nasab and jazm only apply to the present tense. Right, so it will be, instead of yaktubu, yaktubani, yaktubuna, taktubu, taktubani, yaktubuna, it'll be lan yaktuba, lan yaktuba, lan yaktubu, lan taktuba, lan taktuba, lan yaktubna. That noon stays. Lan taktuba, lan tuktuba, lan taktubu, lan taktubi, lan taktuba, lan tuktubna, lan aktuba, lan naktuba. And then with the jazm, lam yaktub, lam yaktuba, lam yaktubu, lam taktub, lam taktuba, lam yaktubna, until the end. Right? Don't worry about the sikh letters yet, but the same thing applies. Right? Lan yad'uwa, lan yad'uwa, lan yad'u. Right? So we're going to leave it at that. Right? So that's what we want to do. Right? To take home, practice number 1. Most important, will benefit you for the rest of your life if you memorize it. You'll find a large portion of the verbs in the Qur'an are on form 1. Right? If you know the scales, both past and present, you'll not only be able to understand which verbs in the Qur'an are form 1, but you'll also be able to very quickly look up what those words mean, and you'll know immediately, right, what tense it is, and you'll know immediately who's the doer, right? Which pronoun is involved in it. So you'll start to have the beginning abilities of translating. Right. So that's for take home. Right? And take home practice, memorize form 1, past tense and present tense, inshallah ta'ala. And then next week we'll take what your efforts during the week, and we'll show you the fruits of them, inshallah, in the upcoming class. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Are there any questions we can take before we close? Either on this or in general on the subject? No? You can either type your questions or you can unmute yourself. Is there something? Is there a question? Okay. Barakallahu feekum, inshallah. Next week if anyone did not receive the email of the forms, just reach out to us, inshallah. Sidi, what's your email?
I posted on the chat.
Okay, it's posted in the chat if you haven't logged off yet, so you can take that. The first page is just an overview of all of the forms. Move to the second page, that's form 1. Right, so if you have keynotes, you can see on the bottom the tabs, or if you have PowerPoint, I believe it's there too. It's on the second tab. Sallallahu wa barak wa sallam ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum.
Shaykh Yusuf. Hope you're feeling better.
वालेकुम सलाम जज़ाकल्लाह खैर दुआ करेंगे इंशाल्लाह दुआ कर दीजिए
Inshallah.